It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here's WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. Welcome back to Chris Eberly. He's the director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership. WNAV is a partner in this coalition. Chris, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me again, Donna.
For the listeners that aren't familiar with it, what is the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership?
The Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership is a coalition of groups that all work toward a common purpose of protecting Maryland's birds and the habitats upon which they depend.
And it's a critical job. In an April 24th article in The New Scientist, written by Andy Coughlin, 1,469 bird species are threatened with extinction, warns a global report. This is around 1/8 of the 10,996 species. And I was listening to, I think it was NPR the other day, I was listening to a report about climate change and how it's throwing off the migratory habits of songbirds.
It is disrupting patterns, and a lot of it is the synchrony of when the birds arrive, of when available food. And so Europe, they have a really good documentation of the sequence and timing of bird arrivals, and it's been getting earlier and earlier. And for some species, I think swallows are one of those, it's really creating problems that they're starting to have nests before they have enough plentiful food for the young. And we're starting to see some of that in this country as well, maybe not to the large extent, but there are certainly great timing events that go on. And horseshoe crabs and red knots are one of those just amazing phenomena that go on at the Delaware Bay. Mm-hmm. And I think there in recent years have been fewer horseshoe crabs coming up to spawn, lay eggs, and I think that's largely due to sea level temperature.
Right.
Not sea level, but sea temperature changes. It's a climate change impact that we still don't know all the impacts that climate change is having and potentially will have down the road.
So, and you go to a conference every year, speaking of down on the shore, the MOS conference, yes?
Right.
The Maryland Ornithological Society.
Correct,
and is it more than just MOS there? It's groups, environmental groups? There
are some environmental groups that go. And what also we're going to try to start early next year is to have a special symposium focused on conservation, whereas the MOS conference has a lot of the focus on the local area and getting out to see the birds and their habitats. We want to try to do something a little more scientific so we can raise awareness about some of the conservation issues and population issues and how we can start to address those.
That's very cool. Moving on to, we have a new administration, still relatively new administration in Washington, D.C. Some of our environmental laws or regulatory agencies are making some changes, which has concerned environmentalists, but these are being done apparently to help the business community. One of these laws is the
Migratory Bird Treaty Act.
Okay, tell me how that affects us here in Maryland.
Well, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, this is actually the centennial of the act that was passed in 1918. The reason for coming around to groups, Audubon was one of the groups that helped bring this about. The market hunting and plume trade back in the early 1900s was decimating bird populations.
And the reason for that, to go back then, women wore hats, with lots of feathers on them.
Right. And of course, a lot of those feathers came from herons and egrets that grew those feathers right at the height of their breeding time. And so it was taking birds out while they were in the process of nesting. And then market hunting, I think one of the examples of a victim of market hunting could be the passenger pigeon. Which at one time may have been the most numerous bird in the New World. And within a matter of about 30, 40 years, was virtually wiped out and did become extinct then.
So there was a good reason this law came onto the books.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
It really put an end to the market hunting and the plume trade in terms of its impacts on birds.
Okay.
So during the rest of the 20th century, we've had just such rapid industrialization that new threats have come along, and a lot of those are based on the industries that have come up, the power lines, the electric grid system, oil waste pits, various things like that can sometimes cause significant impacts. Migratory Bird Treaty Act has been used successfully to help mitigate some of the damages and help industries implement best management practices to minimize those impacts.
So while some view that these changes recently are more business friendly, it actually could turn out to be just the opposite. When turbines, for instance, are being taken out from working properly by birds.
Yeah, right.
It costs a lot of money for a business.
Right. Right. And, you know, it's always been a contentious relationship. Migratory Bird Treaty Act and businesses. The Fish and Wildlife Service, I think, has utilized its prosecutorial discretion wisely over the years. They don't just go after everything that happens, but they go after the ones that have either been a blatant abuse, ignored warnings, or just have had significant amounts of mortality.
Okay, let's hold that thought because we have to take a short break. When we come back, more about what's going on currently with the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Donna Cole in the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is Chris Eberly, the director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership. We're talking about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which has been on the books for quite a long time to protect birds. Some believe these birds were being protected at the cost of businesses. So recently there was a mandate that came down from Washington that said what, Chris?
Well, it was a solicitor's opinion. I think the bottom line for it would be that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act has had a provision where incidental take of birds is subject to prosecutorial discretion. So those are activities whose purpose is not to take birds, but in the course of those activities, they incidentally do take a migratory bird. And that solicitor's opinion basically said they're no longer going to enforce or take a look at anything related to incidental take. So if the purpose of the activity was not to take birds, then
go ahead and do it.
Then essentially go ahead and do it.
What your feeling about that is?
Well,
okay. Yeah.
Well, I worked directly with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service migratory bird folks for 17 years when I was working with Department of Defense lands. And was on the Council for the Conservation of Migratory Birds, which is a group of federal agencies, and this came out of Executive Order 13186, which was signed by President Clinton about federal responsibilities for migratory birds. And through the process of that council, we developed conservation measures and had federal agency participation input on all that, and those conservation measures are now out there today. And basically conservation measures, best management practices, are voluntary mechanisms that agencies and, in the case of non-governmental groups, industries and others can implement that will minimize and mitigate for impacts to migratory birds. And, you know, my perspective on that was things were working well. There's always that tension that agencies and industries, you know, they want to do what they want to do, that they're mandated to do, but they have to be accountable to a certain extent for that. So I think this sort of just ignores all the progress, in my opinion. And, you know, I get it. Can't do advocacy and all that with this program. And I'm glad I don't want to do advocacy. But I think doing common sense work and having voluntary partnerships is what we're all about. And I think what's going to happen now is some of these things are already happening and will continue to happen. There are a number of great partnerships. One really good one is the Avian Powerline Interaction Committee, which a lot of the power companies around the country are members of, and they work to minimize collisions and electrocutions. Some of the annual mortality figures that have been well researched. Collisions with power lines, annual mortality for birds is about 64 million. Collisions with towers, so cell towers and other structures like that, are about 7 million. And of that, more than 90%, maybe 95% are passerines, songbirds, which is more than 5 million a year. Electrocutions are about 5.5 million. Death in oil waste pits, where usually waterfowl come down and just can't get out, that's about 750,000. The Deepwater Horizon incident killed more than a million birds, and fines from the Migratory Bird Treaty Act actually generated $100 million specifically for wetland restoration along the Gulf Coast. So that's one case where enforcing the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the incidental take provision, actually did significant benefit to restore habitats around the Gulf. Let me get back to talking about this Avian Powerline Interaction Committee. I did have a conversation with a biologist from Pepco Holdings. One of the eagle nests that we monitor is on one of their towers up in Cecil County. And we had a really good discussion about that, and I think we're going to have a really good partnership. They work with the Fish and Wildlife Service, get all the appropriate permits. They put buffers around eagle nest when they have to do any kind of activity that might disturb it, so they take it very seriously. And this biologist I had known previously when she was with New Jersey Audubon. So I know she's that's great. A really good person.
That's cool. So it can work.
They want to do the right thing.
That's great.
And they are doing the right thing. And so we're going to help them within Maryland because they have good contacts in Delaware, New Jersey, but they don't yet have a lot of good contact for eagle nest activity in Maryland. So yeah, that's going to, I think, work very well with us.
Let's. We have to take another short break. When we come back, more about this bald eagle nest monitoring. This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me is Chris Eberly, the director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership. He had just mentioned a bald eagle nest in Cecil County. Is it
right? Yeah.
One of the programs within the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership is the Maryland Bald Eagle Nest Monitoring. Full disclosure, I'm a bald eagle nest monitor myself. That happened, I think, as a result of one of your past appearances on the show. Some of the nest monitors, and I don't know how many you have. How many do you have?
I think we have about 185 right now.
And there's always need for more. How many nests do you have?
Well, there's need for more. We have about 285 nests. But,
and counting. People are finding them every day.
There are hundreds of more out there that we don't yet have documented.
Okay. So if you know of a nest, let the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership know. It's marylandbirds.org is the website. You'll find all the email contacts on there. At any rate, I am a nest monitor. Some of the nest monitors do communicate with each other, and such is the case with what I'm about to share with you. We do share the joys and the heartaches of all of our nests, and there are both. On April 8th, two of the nest monitors, Kelly and her mom, were monitoring a nest at a school in Anne Arundel County. For background on this, a bald eagle has to stay on their eggs in order to keep them warm. It's been a horrific season for these nests because of weather, snow and nor'easters. So if they're not kept warm, the eggs won't make it. New bald eagles won't be born in Maryland. At any rate, Kelly sees a guy looking through his binoculars at the nest. He launches his drone shortly thereafter and proceeds harassing the eagles, both mom and dad, to the point they leave the nest. Kelly asked him not to. He refused to stop. He was reported to all the appropriate agencies. Kelly's mother, Elizabeth Hewitt, had photos of the entire incident, as well as the vehicle and license plate of the drone operator. Kelly reached out to me, asked how she could get the word out and what not to do with the drones, especially considering the federal laws that protect these birds. We just talked about the MBTA and...
Yeah, the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act.
Right. The Capitol reported the Fish and Wildlife Service did go to the guy, let him know what the deal is, and he was apologetic, it seemed, which is good that he had some education on it.
Right. I think, and we've had a couple of incidents last year in Garrett County with drone operators harassing eagles. And I think a large part of it is just ignorance. They're not aware of what they're doing that is disturbing eagles. They're probably not aware of the federal regulations that violates. And I think we need to really try to get the word out. We want people to enjoy drones, but we want them to do it in a way that's not going to disturb wildlife.
And by doing that, we don't know, she actually doesn't know there's eaglets in the nest, which I just checked on one of my nests. There are 3 eaglets in my nest. It's hard to tell. Sometimes the nests are so deep, but it would be concerning if those eggs weren't brought to fruition.
Yes, that would be that, and that's the heartache side of it. And we do have, like you mentioned, the weather. We had, I think, 4 nests documented that were blown down in that bad windstorm,
right,
including one of yours.
Right, that one was in Centerville, and it's heartbreaking. Yeah.
Yeah, but we're getting a lot of eaglet hatching now, and as your video showed, and other pictures are showing, it's just that's the great side of being able to do this, and we want to be able to continue to have eagles hatch here, and so we just need to educate the public on what they can do and how it might impact wildlife.
And another way of harassing wildlife, which we've seen over the winter, especially with the snowy owls. For those that don't know, there's this acronym called BIF, Birds in Flight. A lot of photographers, a photo of a bird sitting still is wonderful. I happen to like them better in many cases. Some photographers will go about getting a bird in flight photo by actually flushing the bird, forcing it to move, which isn't good. No,
it's not good. And, I think it's a number of factors, like the drone operators. Sometimes they don't realize what impact that actually has on the bird physiologically, the stress that it causes. Photographers sometimes are a little more persistent, and just a few of them, like a lot of things, it's the few that kind of ruin it for everybody. Birders can also be somewhat problematic when they really want to see a bird. Trespassing or doing things to disturb the bird or other birds. So again, when you're out there enjoying nature or being in nature, one way or the other, you'd have to be aware of your surroundings, be aware of what you may be doing to impact other wildlife, birds, mammals, whatnot. It causes them a lot of stress, and especially the snowy owls who have flown a long way. They may be okay health-wise, but after all that long distance, adding that extra stress to them is just not a healthy thing. And they have to do it twice. They're coming down from the Arctic to come in greater numbers every year, it seems like, definitely this past year. And for something that Chris just mentioned, there is a distinction between birders and photographers. It's two groups. Most of the times we all get along. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's contention between the two. It's kind of, it's ongoing, but it's interesting. Well, and there's often contention among the group. Yeah, that too. Members of the group too. So yeah. Yeah, there's been movies made about that. Yeah, the big year. That showed the good and the bad side. Exactly. Of all that. Chris, thank you for joining me again on the 1430 Connection. Don, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is Donna Cole. We will see you next week.